Good evening and welcome everybody to the April meeting for the San Diego chapter of PDA-CA and PDA. I should paraphrase that we are the Metro chapter since there is a North chapter as well, North County chapter. Tonight's topic is going to be on hate crimes in America, and I'm going to share a screen and throw up the agenda for tonight. There we go. So we are right now at 7 o'clock, 7:05, and we're going to do some business and introduce the forum. And I'd like to kick it off with Mike Thaler. So Mike, go ahead and take it away and give us Mike Thaler's moments.
Okay, you want to unshare your screen maybe so that people can see my beautiful face?
Doing so now.
All right, there I should be anyway. I don't know for sure I am. As you may know, if you remember, that PDA, Progressive Democrats of America, is one of a bunch of what we call members of the PDA family. PDA itself is a federal PAC, and they are concerned with issues and candidates that are from the Congress on up to president. PDA-CA is us, and we are PDA also. And PDA-CA is the equivalent, only it's a separate organization, at least legally, that is concerned with state and local issues and candidates, from dog catcher, who apparently David needs, up to and including the governor. So those are the two groups. Now, we have some interesting, if not exciting, things coming up in the next couple of weeks, and that is because the California Democratic Party's annual convention is happening in approximately a week from now. And it's a state thing, so it's really PDA-CA that's running the PDA-related show. So here's what we're doing, and if you aren't getting the PDA-CA emails, you should go to pdamerica.org, and then when you get there, click on join, and that'll put you on the mailing list. There is no fee to join. And a lot of people change emails addresses, and that, then they stop getting stuff. You really should do that to know what's going on. And the first thing that's going on is that on Monday, April 26th, is what we're calling the PDA-CA Meet the Officer and Candidates, Meet the Officer Candidates for the Progressive Caucus of the CDP. And what that's going to be is a forum of all the people who are running for some role or another, some officer role or another within the Progressive Caucus of the CDP. And of course, the Progressive Caucus of the CDP is a close ally of PDA-CA and PDA for that matter. And what we really want to do is we want to remain their allies, and maybe there's some things they can't do that we can, and maybe there are some things that we would like to do that we could use their help, and so we want to work together. So if you are a voting member of the CDP, also known as a delegate or a DSCC member, I think, and a member of the Progressive Caucus and will vote, you might want to attend that. If you are not a member of the Progressive Caucus but want to vote, you can join between now and the convention and then vote. And hopefully you will know the candidates well enough from Monday's thing to be able to make an intelligent choice. It's not going to be a debate. It will be a forum. So hopefully they won't be yelling at each other. If they are, we have the mute button. On Saturday, though, Saturday, May 1st, May Day, is the Saturday of the convention. And for the last, I don't know how many years, probably somewhere around between 14 and 17 years, PDA has always put on a luncheon at the CDP convention in a restaurant, and it's been a fundraiser. But what we do for those is we try to make it a little bit entertaining. So it's not just a meeting, but it's an entertaining thing. It's meet and greet, some gossip, and that kind of thing. So we're going to try to duplicate that on Saturday, only virtually by Zoom. And it means that we don't have to rent a room. We don't have to buy food. So therefore, we can't in good conscience charge a ticket. So what we're going to do is, it's a free event, but if you feel like you might want to make up for the fact that it's not a fundraiser, you're always more than welcome to donate. I think it's going to be pretty good. We're getting a really good lineup of people, and it's not quite firm enough to actually, say who we're hoping to get. But I think you're going to enjoy it, and and you don't even have to get up. We do recommend that you get some fast food or something, maybe from an Asian restaurant, in honor of the API people that are getting so much grief thanks to our previous president. And those are the two things that are coming up. The third thing that was coming up is we're in it. So that's that. The next person to talk is going to be Danette Abbott, who is our Western States Field Director, I think is her title. She'll introduce herself. And she's going to talk about something called the Liaison Committee. As she talks, it's a PDA thing, so it's a national thing, a federal thing. We at PDA-CA are going to stand back and watch and let PDA make all the mistakes as they get it up and running smoothly. And once they do, we're going to create something similar for PDA-CA that consists of what she's talking about, only at the state assembly and state senate level. So, Danette, who's muted?
Thank you very much. So I'll just go over kind of briefly what we're doing. We started the letter drops, congressional letter drops in February. And so far we have covered HR 1, which is the bill for establishing a commission to investigate the insurrection at the Capitol in January. March, we did the Medicare for All bill, and then we are dropping the all the climate bills this month in honor of, obviously, Earth Day, which is today. Gonzalo actually is a liaison. He's on the call tonight. Thanks for being here. And he's doing a really good job as well in his district. So basically how it works is you sign up to be a liaison, and we get you in touch with your team member who usually they live in the same congressional district. And you monthly, we have monthly meetings where we go over the letter that will be dropped that month. And you get kind of an orientation on how we're going to do that. And then you and your team have a quick meeting to go over who and when you're going to go ahead and send the letter. Usually we reach out to the office and make sure that we're getting in touch with the staffer that handles that kind of that issue, if you will. So for example, this month you would reach out to the person who handles environmental issues and make sure that you talk to them and say, I'm going ahead and sending this letter over for your representative's consideration. We hope that they will co-sponsor the bill. And after you send that over, you usually want to go ahead and send it over to the staffer as well as in DC, as well as locally, if you can. And then after they get the letter, make sure they are in receipt of it, and then you're going to follow up with a call. Since we're in COVID still, we're still in lockdown. A lot of the offices are still working remotely. You're going to want to try and get a Zoom meeting with them to discuss why it's important for them to sign on to this bill. After that, you will fill out a report online. Takes like 2 minutes. Basically, did you get in contact? Did you send the letter? Are they going to co-sponsor it, etc.? It's really easy. It's super fun. You get a chance to develop a relationship, which is really what we're trying to do with your congressperson. And I think the more that you develop that relationship with them, the better the outcomes are going to be, and getting them to see your side and why they should sign on to these bills. So, any questions? Gonzalo, how have you found it?
All
so
I
far?
can say is that Danette and Mike are, Sparks are great support, as well as Dr. Bill and everybody there. So it's been going well so far. I'm having trouble establishing good contact with Dianne Feinstein's staff. They don't want to give their email addresses because then we'll be flooded with constituents. I don't know what they're there for. But
Yeah.
I'm working on that too. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
very much. It's been good so far.
Yeah, you have to be a bit of a pest, especially with, we do have some liaisons that have signed up for Republican. They have a Republican representative, and they're a little bit tougher nut to crack depending on how far right they are. But like I said, pestering gets the job done most of the time. Friendly pestering. We want to always have that, maintain that friendly, non-confrontational relationship and conversation with them, because really getting irate is not going to get anyone anywhere. So we always try to keep it cordial and but persistent. So cordial, persistent. Those are the two the two key words.
Right, and I'm sure that Daryl Issa down here would be happy to join in with any progressive cause.
Oh yes, yeah. Mhm.
And God forbid Dianne Feinstein should have to hear from her constituents.
Yeah, right. And that, I'll give you a prime example. My congressperson is Lou Correa. And he is pretty much a corporate Dem the whole way. He's not progressive really in any way. Actually, I was a little bit surprised. I was on an Earth Day call today earlier, and there was a tracker you could look up to see what environmental bills they voted for. And I was actually surprised that he had voted yes on a lot of them, but not the ones that really count, the big ones that we really need. So I just keep bugging him. I have a couple of team members who keep bugging him, who keep calling. We finally got another meeting with him to talk about the last bill, the Medicare for All bill, which he hasn't responded to at all. So I'm going to basically tell them nicely, well, if you take my call every month, you're not going to have twice the work every month, because we're going to discuss both bills now. So you just have to be really, I think kind of a sense of humor helps too with them as well. But yeah.
Well, how do they sign up to be on the liaison if they want to? You might want to put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat, and I'll also put in kind of our startup kit, so you can take a look at the different documents and stuff like that. So yeah, and any questions, just let me know, and I'll put my email in the chat as well.
Okay.
Dr. Bill did put in the
good thing here is that Juan Vargas is co-sponsor of the bill that we for Medicare for All, and that was fantastic.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then the staff person is so enthusiastic about the bill also.
Good.
Used to be in the health sector, and he knows all the trouble that people went through, and he's very excited. So that makes it easy.
Yeah, that's what I found with
absolutely.
Sarah Jacobs also. Okay, thanks, David.
And it really, just one more point. It really helps. We, Dr. Bill and I were on a call, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. And which rep was that? Do you know who we were talking with? We had a couple of people that came on to share their health stories. And
Washington.
One lady, Washington, was so impactful. She
Washington State, Kilmer.
Yeah,
Correct.
she's had a lung issue. I'm not sure what it was precisely, but she needs to have a lung transplant, a double lung transplant, to actually survive. And it was so just heartbreaking to hear her story. that helps too if you have someone you can bring with you that has a personal story, kind of like Bernie always said, tell your story, because that definitely makes that human connection as well. So that's it. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's move on to, that's all great information. And Danette, thank you very much for spearheading this in the West. She's our exceptional Western States field rep. And so anything that you want to do with PDA, if you look on the PDA site and you see anything that you have a question about or anything, you can contact Danette, and she will, if she doesn't know the answer, she'll get you the answer because she's right on top of everything. We're going to move along, and we're going to talk about our next meeting, and this is going to be a statewide meeting, and we're calling it Water, Water Everywhere, but with fracking, not a drop to spare. And basically, it's we're going to be talking about how fracking is ruining the groundwater in the state of California, just like it has in Texas and Pennsylvania and several other states, Oklahoma. There's a town in Texas that it killed a town in Texas because they live on groundwater, and the fracking destroyed the groundwater, so it was poisonous. So I'm going to try and get somebody to spearhead it from our PDA-CA group, one of the other chapter leaders, and I'm going to try and hook into him somebody from the USGS or another geohydro specialist to talk about what's going on, and then we can also talk about some of the legislation and why some of our legislators and our governor won't ban fracking. So it will be a pretty interesting meeting. And I'll take a moment here. If anybody wants to unmute, I have my notepad out, and I'd love it for people to give me some ideas for what they'd like to hear as far as what meeting topics, forum topics they'd like to learn about. So feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what's on your horizon, what you'd like to learn about, because we can tap into, we have a whole plethora of experts and advisors on our advisory committee, from legal to criminal justice to civil justice, etc. So anybody want to raise their hand?
David, may I make a suggestion?
You may.
I mean, you know, it was interesting hearing you talking about fracking. Obviously, that's a considerable issue here in California, as you pointed out. There are a lot of lessons to be drawn from, as you mentioned, Texas and Colorado and Pennsylvania and other states. You know, the southern San Joaquin Valley has been really affected by fracking. I think that might be an interesting presentation. I could probably find some folks who might be able to go and speak more on fracking. I know of an organization sort of on the Central Coast, but they've got some good people that could speak to that. And then a couple of years ago, I gave a media misinformation presentation to this organization, and I'd be happy to give an updated version of that. In fact, excuse me, I recently developed it into a whole PowerPoint presentation, and I gave it to the Rancho Penasquitos Dems a couple of weeks ago. So I'd be happy to bring that here at some point. I'd be at your disposal on time, of course.
That sounds great. Thank you. I have it down, and that's a great offer. I appreciate it. And that was a very powerful presentation. So thank you for that. Anybody else have any ideas of what they'd like to hear as topics for forums that you'd like to find out more about? Things that the media is giving us misinformation. Patricia.
Yeah, of course, we have a wonderful person in our midst here, Ray Lutz, who's very knowledgeable about our elections and the state of our elections. And maybe he could speak to us about what he is up to now, which I think is a very interesting program he has developed to do counting of ballots that he can get from different states. And that would be very interesting to know what's the status of what he's doing at this time.
Cool. Yeah, maybe we can get Mimi Kennedy to moderate it and get maybe another expert in there. And
Yeah, Greg Palast comes to mind.
Greg Palast, Mimi Kennedy, Greg Palast, and Ray Lutz. That sounds like
That's
a very powerful talk.
Yeah.
I had a quick suggestion. I go to, it's called Election Protection on Tuesday afternoons, and Harvey Sluggo Wasserman steers those, and they're actually super. I think Dr. David's been to a few of them. They're really informative, kind of scary, because there's a lot of shenanigans going on in terms of voter suppression and stuff like that. But we might want to think about having him on one night. He's very, very, very well informed on the national
name again.
His name is Harvey Wasserman. I can get.
Oh, we know Harvey.
He's physically been in our meetings back when it was the Sizzler, and even though it was the Sizzler, he came anyway.
Oh, okay. The Sizzler has a good salad bar, or at least it did.
It did.
I like the Sizzler.
I loved it.
I did too.
Okay, yeah, and I got several of his books. So Harvey Wasserman, he's a great guy. All right, any other ideas? Any other?
I was just thinking that if we did election protection, that we might be able to get the Secretary of State, who is my former assembly person, in too, and that would be really cool.
That would be awesome if we could get our friend Dr. Shirley Weber. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Mike. How about Raul? Do you have anything that we need to know that we could talk about for the city? And I'll get to you next, Andrea. Beth, I'm sorry, I saw your hand just after.
Actually, let me think that through. Go to Andrea Beth first.
Andrea Beth.
So while you're talking about election protection, I wanted to let everybody know that Stacey Abrams has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which would be a wonderful thing to talk about as well.
With a Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes, sir.
I just kept thinking today when I heard that the orange one's head's going to explode when he hears about that. Hopefully.
I like writing all this stuff down. Thank you, Andrea, but that's a great suggestion too. You're awesome. All right, back to you, Ralph. You want more time or you want to pass?
I'm gonna think of something. I'm gonna pass for right now, though.
Okay, you can always bring it up at the end too. We'll have time at the end. Again, let me do a quick, real fast acknowledgement for everybody who's been working on the liaison program. It's great if you have time during the day where you can meet these people. In that I work from 7 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's just really impossible for me to be in that liaison program. I really wanted to be, but it's just not happening for right now until I retire. So I really think, the people that are able to participate and do that are great patriots in that sense. So I appreciate you very much. So it's about 7:29. So I think this is probably a great time for me to introduce our moderator, Tommy Howe. I used to listen to him on the radio on 91X. And he has been an environmental defender giant in San Diego, working with all sorts of organizations from Surfrider to keeping butterflies in San Diego, keeping the monarch butterflies flying through San Diego. So without further ado, let me give you to Tommy Howe, the Butterfly King.
Thank you very much, David. I appreciate it. And it's great to see everyone. I really appreciate being brought on board to speak about this tonight and help moderate this this forum. So this evening, we're going to be speaking a bit about hate crimes. And, obviously this comes at a very compelling time. We're at a point right now where we've seen a lot of a terrible crime being committed against our Asian neighbors, our friends, and our loved ones. It's been occurring often in random fits and starts, but there's been more of a drumbeat of intimidation. And that goes back, obviously, to last year when the president was using such hateful and divisive and racist language, which has continued since he's left the White House. But as we're well aware of, when we consider the Exclusion Act 100 years ago, when we consider the internment of Japanese American civilians in 1942 during the Second World War, this is nothing that's really new. And so obviously what's happening right now with our AAPI and Asian neighbors is a great concern, and I think is sort of the backdrop for what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we're going to speak to a gentleman whom I'll introduce in a moment, who has some experience prosecuting hate crimes. We're also going to speak to a longtime Democrat and individual within progressive spaces as well to speak more about this. So I want to introduce, first of all, let me introduce everyone that we have, and then I'll cue everyone to speak and make their remarks. But first of all, we have District 7 Councilmember Raul Campillo here, elected last November. Very nice to have you here, Councilmember. Good to see you. Looks like you've got, is that Lake Murray in the background? Okay, all right. I'm pretty sure I wasn't deceived there. And then we have Andrea Beth Damski here as well, joining us from the Mercado. This is beautiful. Like I said, I think we've got a pretty good dinner in store for us tonight if this holds through. And I believe we had one other guest that may or may not be joining us this evening, but when they come on board, we'll go to them at that time. So Councilmember Campillo, why don't we turn it over to you, and you can give us kind of your remarks and some legal thoughts on the prosecution of hate crimes.
Sure. Thanks, Tommy. And thanks everyone for having me here tonight. Raul Campillo, San Diego City Council District 7 council member. Thanks to everyone for all your support this last election. It's great being here. And before that, I was a prosecutor in the city attorney's office. Now you might be saying to yourself, the city attorney, they only prosecute misdemeanors. Well, in the city, in the state of California, hate crimes can include misdemeanors and felonies. Typically, it's an extra charge on top of it, or it can be the direct charge of violence against property or a person, or a violation of their civil rights in some other way. But typically, in the way that the city attorney's office here in San Diego handles it, if it's a misdemeanor coupled together with evidence of the bias that has to be proved as well, it can be handled at the city attorney level instead of going to the district attorney level. Now, during my time there, I was really happy that I didn't have to prosecute too many hate crimes. But of course, part of that is because we know people don't report hate crimes as often as they should, because the intimidation that comes along with that, and not just the individual harm, but the societal and community harm that comes from that, oftentimes leads people to not report it. So when we think of hate crimes in our communities, it's really an iceberg, a tiny little bit above the water that you can see, and a huge amount below that goes unreported. The other aspect of that too is that if the perpetrator doesn't exhibit the bias necessary to a point where it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt by a prosecutor, you can't prosecute it. And so oftentimes there is that motivation, but it's just so hard to prove that you simply have a prosecutor who's going to try to prove the underlying violence or damages that were perpetrated. But I have a few slides here for you, so we have a bit of some clarity on the legal issues here. And so now I am going to share this screen. Can everybody see that? Great. So let's just start very simply with where the penal code is on this, section 42.2.86. And this is just the public policy that's outlined in there. This isn't the specific statute about penalties and all that stuff. I'm gonna get to that in a second, but I just wanted to highlight what this is trying to show us about how our state legislature set about to approach hate crimes. So it is the public policy of the state that the principal goals for sentencing for hate crimes are the following: punishment for the hate crimes committed. And we all understand that the implication of sentencing being a punishment, good or bad. And I would say that punishment alone is not a good way to go about sentencing for a crime, but it is there in the statute. 2, crime and violence prevention, which I think prevention is something we all want to see done, including prevention of recidivism and prevention of crimes and violence in prisons and jails. And then third, which I think that as progressives, we really want to see more of in our system, restorative justice for the immediate victims of the hate crimes and for the classes of persons terrorized by the hate crimes. And as much as we know that hate crimes are just really abhorrent at their core, we do want to see restorative justice so that the perpetrators learn from it as well. But obviously, we have to send a signal that it is so abhorrent and destructive to our social fabric that we want to prevent it and denounce it, really. This is not a typical type of crime. Some of the penalties for hate crimes, if it's a misdemeanor, like all misdemeanors, less than 1 year in county jail, a fine of $5,000, and then the court shall order that the defendant perform a minimum of community service not to exceed 400 hours to be performed over a period not to exceed 350 days during a time other than his or her hours of employment and school attendance. So clearly we want, they're emphasizing there that this is a community a crime against the community as much as it is against the victims directly. And so they say that the court shall order community service. It's not discretionary. It's got to be there. I will say that from my perspective, community service for pretty much any crime really does serve a good purpose, and it does allow the individual to learn from their issue, and particularly when racism is at hand, as it is with hate crimes, or it's not always racism. It can be against disabled individuals or LGBTQ individuals, lots of other circumstances, which we'll get into here. It really does open the eyes of lots of, especially young people, to learn just why that crime was so bad. For felony hate crimes, it can go to an additional 1 or 2 or 3 years on top of the sentence for the actual violent crime that was a felony. And if it's with another person, including aiding and abetting, there's an additional 2, 3, or 4 years in state prison at the court's discretion. So the state there is showing that when it's group hate crimes, it's even more disincentivized with an extra penalty. As a prosecutor, you always get a case and think, okay, what is the crime that's being alleged here? And you go straight to what are called the jury instructions. The state of California's Judicial Council, which is made up of a bunch of judges and lawyers across the state, have like a several thousand-page packet of jury instructions. This is what gets read to the jury after all the evidence is heard and the cases are closed after closing argument. You may have seen in the Chauvin trial just a couple days ago, after the closing arguments, the judge read specific definitions, and these are all things that are hammered out between the prosecution and defense attorney well beforehand, without the jury being around to know what may or may not have made it into the jury instructions. But this is what a judge has to read the jury so that they understand what they're supposed to do with the evidence. And it's really long and convoluted, but in essence, a hate crime allegation has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, just like the underlying crime that has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And the thing that I'm going to call your attention most directly is this bottom part. It says we have to prove that the defendant acted in whole or in part because of the actual or perceived characteristic of the other person, meaning the victim, and showing the defendant was biased against that person based on their actual or perceived disability, gender, nationality, race and ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or association with the person or group having those characteristics. We'll note very quickly that if it's a religious thing, that also applies to atheists and people who are agnostic. So if a religious fanatic violates an agnostic or atheist, that is also a hate crime. It's not just you have to have, it protects atheists and agnostics as well. And so the bias motivation caused by the defendant, motivation caused the defendant to commit the alleged act. So you really have to show that it is a substantial factor, and that's the second page of this jury instruction. That means it's not more than a trivial or remote factor. So when there's like a racial slur caught on camera or by a witness standing nearby, that is absolutely the evidence that I as a prosecutor would point to as a substantial factor. And it doesn't have to be the only factor. It could be one of many reasons, whatever it is. But when that evidence comes out, that's really where the prosecutor's job is to go after that substantial factor and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. As I said, Gender includes, gender as well, gender identification, as well as all the other aspects that go into sex and gender appearance. This applies to our trans brothers and sisters as well. Nationality, it really gets to citizenship, race, ethnicity, all the typical things. And like I said, agnosticism and atheism are protected, sexual orientation, and then the association. So I'll stop sharing that now, just so now we can move beyond all the lawyer speak. But when I few years at the city attorney's office, I had a few cases, and I'll speak about one in particular where there was a hate crime aggravating charge on along with the assault and battery that we charged. The victim was an Uber driver. He was Arabic in ethnicity or nationality, and he was attacked by one of his clients, his Uber clients. And for whatever reason, as the perpetrator was getting out of the car, screamed at him, called him all sorts of names, punched him in the back of the head, got out of the car. I think he even spit at him through the window. And there was, I forget what was it. It was a dash cam. The Uber driver had a dash cam and caught that on camera. And so we didn't just prosecute for the battery. We also prosecuted for the hate crime aggravating addendum to it, I guess you'd call it, which is itself its own crime. And so as we know from our what do you call it? The jury instruction that I pointed out, that's its own penal code, 422.7. And the defense attorney and the defendant pled guilty to that. I'm sad to say that the judge also found the person guilty for all these, but put into the probation that if they completed their probationary community service and paid money in restitution and did a couple other things, that they would dismiss the extra charge. And so the judge, that was above our objection in the city attorney's office, above my very vocal objection in court. But the defense attorney portrayed the defendant in a very particular manner for whatever reason. I think they were saying something about the way they were raised, and it was a young person. He was in his early 20s, and the judge felt sympathy for that individual, that defendant. And so after the community services was done, the judge dismissed the hate crime from the charge. They still had the battery on their record, but not the hate crime that went with it. We were not happy about that. We went into chambers. I was very vocal about that not being the case, that it's really important that the community see that hate crimes are not something that will be dismissed. And the judge disagreed and thought that, the person didn't deserve to have that on their record. And of course, that's in the judge's discretion to do. So, that was just over our objection. That was pretty sad to see. The victim was obviously not very happy with that because it's such a personal thing to be attacked for all these, classes that people are part of. And so you do what you can do in court, but the judge has the discretion at the end. So anyway, that is my personal story of prosecuting. We didn't have to go to trial. We didn't have to do a whole bunch of other stuff. The evidence was clear as day. And so, we got the guilty conviction on there. That battery will be on their record. And they had to do hundreds of hours of community service in that. And the restitution, I forget what the cleaning costs and all the stuff involved in the car, the medical bills, the deductible that had to be paid by the person to go to the hospital to have their bruises checked out on the back of their head, and all that sort of stuff were paid as well by the defendant. So you do as much as you can when you're a prosecutor on hate crimes. You try to emphasize just how serious this is. As you can tell, the state legislature's statutes show just how serious we take this. But the judge did what they did there. But that's really what I have in this circumstance. On the city council, we had a resolution condemning racism and extremism with the backdrop of the insurrection on January 6th, together with the anti-AAPI hate that we've been seeing in our community. just a few weeks ago. And these sorts of things are really important to the city council to denounce, because it really sends a signal of where we stand. And, you know, the United States Congress just had their resolutions, passed on API hate. And I know that many Republicans did not vote in favor of that. I'm happy to say that the one Republican in city council here in San Diego did vote for that. I will stick up for Chris Cate. He's a good guy when it comes to these sorts of very obvious issues about community protection from violence, from racism, and things like that. I'm happy that it was a unanimous vote. But with that, I'm happy to stop right there. Tommy, I know we got questions coming up later, but thanks for coming to my TED Talk, and happy to answer questions when we get to the end of this.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Campillo. That was terrific. Very informative presentation, and thank you for sharing some of those documents with us. Obviously, I'm not an attorney. I don't know if we have any other attorneys here, but it is interesting to see how the mechanics of that work and how you wind up putting together cases for that. So thank you.
I'll say right now that without that video evidence in that Uber case, we would not have been able. I mean, one person saying he called me this wouldn't have been enough. So it's really, really hard to catch people in this, to prosecute them successfully. So whenever someone says, "Oh, this racism isn't really there," it's really there, believe me. And I hear so many times the evidence that of that, and we just can't introduce it. There's lots of batteries that we prosecute successfully, but because we don't have the audio of the person using racial slurs, we actually can't even bring that like in if it's because it's like really, it's prejudicial in a lot of ways. And sometimes a judge won't even allow a witness to say, "Oh, and they said this extra stuff on it," because then the jurors start latching on to that, and it can be prejudicial. There's special rules against prejudicial evidence without more support. So there's actually things that stand in the way of evidence of racism coming in before a jury. So anyway, with that, I'll leave it alone, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Raul. Appreciate it. And let's move over to Andrea Beth Damski, who I got to know Andrea Beth. I got to say, it was, I guess it was the end of 2016. It was shortly after the disastrous election in 2016 when Donald Trump came to power. And well, I know we're all thankful for being where we are at a point where we're post-Trump presidency, but obviously we're still living with a lot of the after effects of that presidency and that campaign that he ran in 2016 and 2020. So Andrea Beth, wonderful to have you here. Obviously, you've been active in the Democratic Party for years, and the floor is yours. Great to see you.
Thanks, Tommy. It's wonderful to see you again, and also you, Council Member Raul, and also some friends here I haven't seen in a long time. Boy, this has been a long pandemic. I am not a legal expert. This is not my forte. I was asked to speak about hate from a personal perspective today, but I do hope, Raul, that you will talk a little bit later about the difference between hate crimes and hate incidences, which is an important distinction to make. So many of us, I am not, I'm a Jewish person, I'm a lesbian, I'm a woman, I'm a senior. I experience incidences of hate on a regular basis on any one of those aspects of my identity. And hate incidences, while they're not prosecutable, it is important to report them. I see David, I have 15 minutes. Is that what you're telling me? Okay, thank you. So I spent some time doing some thinking and writing today about myself and my background. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, to a Jewish family. My parents were children during the Holocaust, and they grew up seeing people coming, immigrating to New York, Holocaust survivors. I grew up in Brooklyn seeing Holocaust survivors in my neighborhood. So I grew up in a family that was pretty closeted as a Jewish family, even though we lived in a community that had many, many Jews in it. What that looked like for us was that we were not members of a synagogue. I didn't go to Hebrew school. I didn't really learn anything about Judaism until I decided to get curious when I was 30. So we were cultural Jews, and basically we're in the closet as Jewish people, which is really how I think about it. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes here. So like I said, initially I am a senior, I'm lesbian, I'm Jewish. So during this last administration, when Trump came into power in 2016, it was really apparent to me that I had 3 targets on my back: as a woman, as a Jew, and as a lesbian. In progressive circles, it became apparent to me that I had 2 targets on my back: as a senior and as a Jewish person. And I talk about this because I don't think it was intentional, but Jews are the universal boogeyman, for lack of a better term. We are throughout history blamed for society's problems. When there is a problem and nobody's sure what it is, you know what the cause is, blame it on the Jews. So we see this throughout history, not only in the Holocaust, you know, the most recent horrible example, but Jews are described as being too poor or too rich, too successful or too lazy, too powerful or too unambitious. We have been blamed for diseases, including the Black Death or bubonic plague, as well as COVID-19, something we share in common with our AAPI brothers and sisters. We have been accused of killing Christ and killing children for making matzah with their blood at Passover. Today, this parallels propaganda, which says Israel is killing Palestinian children to use their organs for organ donations. So Jews are depicted as all powerful monsters and aliens controlling the banks, the corporations, and the media. In fact, the word corporatist is code for Jew. And all of these ancient libels against the Jewish people and more are found in today's QAnon conspiracy theories. These themes are recycled over and over again in different ways at different times in history. And as the universal boogeyman, Jews are put into whatever boxes can be convenient to fit the hate narrative of the moment, i.e., somehow we are responsible for these computer chips that are in the COVID-19 vaccines and the space lasers that caused California's wildfires last year. So, and it comes across a little differently on the right and on the left. On the right, white supremacist theory blames Jews for the success and the rise of the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the reproductive freedom movement, the gay rights movement, and more. We're considered a scourge that sullies white purity and to be eliminated, as in the chant, Jews will not replace us. And for Jews, we live with this double-edged sword when it comes to our identity, whether or not we are white people. On the left, we are considered white colonial oppressors. On the right, we are considered anything but white. So, so we have white privilege until our cover, quote unquote, is blown and we are revealed as Jews, and then we are hated for having the audacity to pretend to be white. So for that reason, I call this conditional whiteness. And relevant to San Diego's history, it wasn't that long ago that Jews were not welcome to own homes in La Jolla. George Soros, and I'm talking about this, I'm going to make mention to Genevieve Jones-Wright, who I know is welcome to be a panelist today, but she's not here. This is about her. When she was running for district attorney a few years ago, George Soros, a very wealthy Holocaust survivor and generous benefactor to many progressive political and social action causes, funded a large television ad campaign for Genevieve Jones-Wright for her campaign for DA. And I was so excited to see that transsectional, that alliance. And almost as soon as those ads came on, the religious right attacked her with this spate of intersection of anti-Black racism with anti-Semitic hate. Because George Soros is the universal boogeyman on the right, but he's also the universal boogeyman on the left, and nobody talked about it. I really wish that Genevieve was here tonight to talk about this, because I never spoke with her about her take on what happened, but her ads were pulled immediately as soon as the attacks on George Soros happened. And that was the end of that ad campaign, which I actually thought was a brilliant campaign. So on the left, anti-Semitism appears in different ways. We're really not welcome to talk about anti-section and intersectional discussions about undoing racism because we are considered white. Again, the terrible irony is that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust precisely for not being white. It was a genocide. Further, Jews are diverse in every possible way. In the Jewish community, which has been doing its own work on unlearning racism the last few years, we've been doing demographic surveys of American Jews and have discovered that at least 1 million Jews of color live in the United States alone. This means we have Black Jews, we have Asian Jews, we have African American Jews, we have Jews of every race you can imagine. And in the Middle East, the racial diversity of Jews is even greater. So what I find is that anti-Semitism makes progressive uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because they fail to understand that it is racism. And they get angry when Jews call it out. So if Jews don't speak out, we're invisible. When we do speak out, we're shouted down for talking about a quote unquote non-existent problem, or shutting down free speech, or making ourselves too visible, or in current vernacular, centering ourselves. There's a move today in progressive spaces also to redefine anti-Semitism to include people who are not Jews. This is erasure. While there are other Semitic peoples in the world, the term anti-Semitism was coined specifically to refer to Jews and is defined as hostility or prejudice against Jewish people. And then there's the elephant in the room, which is when progressives are talking about anti-Semitism at all, they automatically switch over to talking about Israel. For the sake of tonight's panel about hate crimes, I'm only going to say one thing about that. And it's not about politics or what you believe about Israel. What I want to say about it is that the dialogue about Israel in the progressive community is toxic to Jews, simply because it's dividing Jews up. And we can't afford to be divided up from each other. Before the Holocaust, the worldwide Jewish population was about 16.6 million. Last year, our numbers were estimated at 14.7 million. In perspective, Jews comprise about 2% of the world's population and 0.2% of the US population. Roughly half of all the Jews in the world live in Israel and about half in the United States. So we're a really tiny percentage of people in the world, and regardless of what happens in Israel, Jews need to be in solidarity with each other. Let's see. So in my early 20s, I discovered feminism, and I learned how to unlearn internalized misogyny, meaning I had to learn how to unlearn the messages of hate that I took in growing up about being a woman. In my mid-20s, I came out as a lesbian, and having unlearned misogyny made it possible for me to unlearn internalized homophobia. In my early 30s, I decided that I wanted to claim being Jewish. You know, growing up in a family that pretty much was in a closet as Jews. So having unlearned internalized misogyny and homophobia made it possible for me to unlearn internalized anti-Semitism. And the point I'm talking about this is it's important when we talk about hate to unlearn the hate messages that we learn growing up, wherever we learn them, whether it's internalized hate messages about ourselves or internalized hate messages about people who are different from ourselves. I don't understand why it is that people are so easily manipulated into hating people who are different from themselves. It's something we all need to be aware of and guard against. When we see or hear something which rouses suspicion about another person, we need to pay attention and ask, is this true? Is it real? Where does it come from? Is it endangering someone? Reporting hate crimes isn't easy, And being a person who reports a hate crime is especially difficult, where we have this belief in our country that people are innocent until proven guilty. It's especially difficult for a victim of a hate crime to do the standing up again and again and again to say, yes, this really happened to me. Yes, it was an act of hate, and yes, it was wrong. Towards that, I want to leave you with a resource. There's a man who I believe is brilliant. His name is Eric K. Ward. He's the director of the Western States Center. He's a Black man who teaches about how important it is to understand anti-Semitism if you want to understand white supremacy. So I'm going to screen share an article just so you can see what it looks like, and then I'll post some links to the article and information about him in the chat after that, and you can look at that during Q&A. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, giving you permission to share your screen.
Thank you. So, okay. So this is the article by Eric Ward. It's called Skin in the Game, How Anti-Semitism Animates White Nationalism. What's interesting about Eric is that he, his wife, I don't know if he's still married to her, but his wife at the time was a Jewish woman. And he was in a unique position as a Black man having an interracial Black and Jewish family to learn about anti-Semitism. And this article, which is really brilliant, talks about work he did undercover with white nationalists to learn what they think about racism and anti-Semitism. It's a hard read, it's an important read, and I recommend it highly. And I don't know if he's any of these people. So that's what I have to share. I'll stop that for now, and I'll post some links in the chat, and that's it for me.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea Beth Damski. And I don't believe we have our next guest here, do we, David? We're still waiting on Joanne.
Right. She was texting me since she's wrapping up at work, and that was about 30 minutes ago, and so we're still waiting for her.
Okay.
So we can go into Q&A right now, and I'll text her again. I think Andrea Beth led off with the first question for Raul to kind of address the difference between hate crimes and hate incidents.
Sure, it's an important distinction. So a hate incident is it's not a prosecutable activity, but nonetheless, it really is an intimidating conduct that oftentimes leads to hate crimes. The clearest example of a hate incident is what we saw last year in Santee with a person wearing a KKK outfit, and then the individuals wearing swastikas on their backs as they went into the grocery stores in Santee. What that is doing is that's sending a signal that they harbor significant racism and bias against members of their community, but without the threat. And also, if you make a threat of violence paired together with the bias that supports a hate crime, that itself is a crime. So it's just a special type of prosecution over their verbal threat. But the people who committed the hate incident didn't really vocalize their biases or threaten violence. They simply wore it on their backs, right? So that is First Amendment. It is First Amendment protected speech, but of course, we know that business owners, for any reason, can prevent someone from coming into their business. And that is, they don't have to allow a person in a KKK outfit or wearing a swastika or any other racism going on there to enter into their business. So, there's ways for us as members of our own community to stand up against that, to encourage business owners and other establishments to not allow their patrons to act that way. But hate crime is very specifically either a threat or violence or property damage that is targeted at an individual because of those biases that we talked about earlier.
Thank you, council member. And you know what? I think what we can do is until Joanne arrives, we can take some questions and we can have some discussion. I would encourage everyone to drop some questions into the chat. That typically is the most effective way to get the most questions out there and give the most time for our guests to answer them. And if Joanne's able to join us, and I hope she will, then we can certainly give her some speaking time and incorporate her into the discussion once she wraps up her remarks. So I would ask a question about, lately I've mentioned when we're talking about some of the anti AAPI sort of random violence. I've also mentioned that in terms of intimidation, making a threat, giving someone an unpleasant look, and I apparently a lot of these negative interactions and intimidation happen in grocery stores or in businesses. But I didn't know, Raul or Andrea, you can speak to this too, like how there is no way to police or even enforce something that is intimidating unless you are specifically threatening violence. Is that correct?
Well, I'd say that, I mean, in terms of the policing of it, I guess it not really. I guess it has to rise to the level of evidence towards a crime for police officers or anybody else to take it to that next level. What I think is just important is, and it's hard to tell people to do this because sometimes it feels like you're inviting more of the pain and violence towards you by standing up for yourself. But just, I think that, and we all sort of have an instinct to de-escalate things too, because we're taught at a young age, and we teach our family members and community members, like, don't escalate things, de-escalate them. But I would say that the bad looks that you're talking about, right? Typically it's people in a neighborhood that is above their socioeconomic grade. Oftentimes, I mean, I'll just that is where I hear about a lot of it, actually. I don't know if I would encourage someone to try to call it out now that I think about it, but that's what makes it tricky. You don't want to have someone say, hey, why are you looking at me like I don't belong here? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, let me tell you and let me show you. And now you've got some serious pain coming, right? What I think is important is for the establishment owners themselves, if they see something, to just tell a person to leave in that form, and they don't have to explain why. Just tell them to get out, and to protect your customers that are good, well-behaved people that aren't intimidating each other. That's the same sort of trepidation I'm even showing in how the right response is exactly how a person who's being treated this way feels, because it's not entirely clear just when you show strength in response to intimidation or you show peacefulness in response to intimidation. But you bring up a good question, Tommy.
I mean, yeah, and these interactions can occur so quickly. No one really processes it until you're driving home afterwards, a half an hour later. Andrea, you should feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have any thoughts to add, I want to get to Patricia and Danette's question, but did you have any remarks on that, Andrea?
No, the legal part is really not my forte, but I do often wonder. In fact, I had reached out to Joanne, who we're hoping will join us soon, to ask whether it would be welcome and useful for people to form like a shopping buddy service. Because this particularly happens in the AAPI community when folks are going shopping. I would offer to be a shopping buddy to somebody who feels afraid to go to the store because they're experiencing hate as an AAPI person. So it's something I've been thinking a lot about. It's as a Jewish person, it's not something I think much about because people are always telling me I don't look Jewish. There's no particular look for a lesbian. There's no particular, and I never look my age. So I'm personally not getting any of those things. I mean, certainly I get intimidation as a woman, which we're not even talking about, but intimidating and hate messages against women are, they're everyday, they're commonplace, they're everywhere. And I think people are more likely to come to the aid of a woman who's being intimidated than they would be of somebody who was a person of color. And I wish that was not the case.
Andrea, Beth, you bring up something that I wanted to just piggyback off of, talking about the misogyny. It just goes to show just how ingrained misogyny is into our culture, that it is a hate crime to act on a bias that is misogynistic against a woman. But the words that would be used to reflect that bias are so commonplace as just cuss words that if a person were caught saying them while they hurt somebody, I don't think a jury would be able to find someone guilty of that, because they would say, well, it's reasonable to think that that's just a negative word that they used as they hurt a woman, but not because they're a woman. Like, that just shows how in our society that whole sort of thing is tilted against women when it comes to violence. So as you said that, it just popped into my mind, that aspect of it. Yeah, I think it's good. It's interesting you bring up the shopping buddy. I've actually had conversations with the president of Mesa College, Dr. Luster, and she and my office are trying to coordinate a way to support the AAPI community on campus, because she's told me how many students of hers feel really nervous about their parents going out after the pandemic and going grocery shopping very specifically. And so we're trying to think of a way to talk on campus about these sorts of things and make people find a way to make people feel safe as we come out of the pandemic, to avoid hate crimes and hate incidences. And then on top of that, when you mix in the fact that a lot of racism is directed towards people who racist individuals think their target doesn't speak English, that whole sort of thing mixes into it, in an intimidation factor. And so your idea of the shopping buddy is actually a really good one.
Cool.
I'm happy to see we got Joanne here.
Yay.
It sounds like Joanne Fields has joined us, which is and Joanne, I sort of hate to throw you on, while you're still catching your breath and maybe getting your coat hung up and everything. But welcome. It's good to have you here. So far, Councilmember Campillo and Andrea Beth have spoken about hate crimes, and we were recently just talking about intimidation with this last question. But if you'd like to speak for about 10 minutes and give some of your remarks, I know we'd love to hear them.
I thank you so much, Tommy, and thank you everyone for having me tonight. I apologize for being late, and something came up at work, and I had to finish, so I apologize. But again, thank you for having me. My name is Joanne Fields. I am the Government and Public Relations Director of the Asian Pacific Islander Initiative, and I'm also director for the Filipino Resource Center. And we've started, the API initiative is about 3 years old, so we're like an infant compared to many organizations. However, everyone that's involved has over 30 years or close to 30 years experience each. So that would amount to about 150 years experience collectively. So I'm excited that we have come together, because a lot of people don't understand when we say Asian Pacific Islander, how big that umbrella actually covers. Because if I ask you who's Asian, usually people will name off first Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian, Hmong. And South Asian is also included there. So that's Bangladesh, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, and then Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander is Samoan, Chamorro, Tongan. So it's a huge umbrella. And then according to the US Census, nearly half are Filipino. And I like to open that way because when we say stop API hate, that covers that whole umbrella, and San Diego is very diverse. But according to the census, nearly half of the Asian Pacific Islanders residing in the county of San Diego are of Filipino descent. So that amounts to about 200,000 according to the 2010 census. So we're waiting for the results for 2020. And when we're talking about Stop API Hate, we did have we want to say it's a hate crime because we see an uptick across the nation of violence against our elderly Asians. And but the incidents that took place here in San Diego on the MTS trolley, we had an 83-year-old Lola. Lola is a title for our elderly, so that's like saying grandma. So an 83-year-old Lola was on her way home after visiting friends in Encanto in southeastern San Diego, and she was going back home to downtown where she lives, and a random attack where it resulted in her having to go to the hospital. And then there was a report made to the district attorney, and she did receive victims assistance, but it wasn't really culturally competent. They didn't speak the language. She doesn't speak English fluently. She speaks Tagalog fluently. That's our national language. So when we say that, you know, there's hate crimes, hate incidents, that incident wasn't recorded as a hate crime, and or because it didn't qualify for, you know, the elements that would deem it a hate crime. So it gets frustrating. It gets frustrating to advocate that we see, and there's documentation by a national organization of similar incidences, which are resulting to over 3,000 similar incidences. But again, they're not hate crimes because they didn't have a racial slur, or they didn't, you know, go back to your country, go back to where you came from. That wasn't said. But when you look at the reports nationwide, it's the same incident. It's attacking the elderly, usually elderly female. And we've seen that in New York, where she was also Filipina. She was walking to church and she was attacked. And the security of one of those, I think it was maybe a luxury apartment complex, and they just watched while she was getting kicked in the head. So that's two incidences, but there was also a similar incidence of like George Floyd, that there was a police officer in Northern California. Police was called to a residence. The sister of the person that basically was murdered, she called the police because her brother was having a mental breakdown, and they couldn't handle him anymore. They called the police, and the way they restrained him, the knee on the neck. 2 days later, he passed away. But it wasn't a national uproar because you usually don't hear about incidences in our community. Not until we saw what happened in Atlanta with the 8 people that passed away. So it seems like it's new to many when it comes to Asian Pacific Islander hate, but this hate has been historically happening. It's happened before, you know, Atlanta. It happened before the Lola was attacked, but it's not usually publicly known. We believe that there's an underreporting because we don't really have a relationship with law enforcement, so people don't know what to report or who to report. Usually if you call the police, you're calling 911, which is for an emergency only. So an incident like on MTS, if she wasn't injured that resulted in going to the hospital, that might not have been reported, because like at first she didn't want to talk to media, but we wanted to raise the awareness that this is happening. We need you to be vigilant, and more importantly, if you see something, say something. It doesn't matter if you're Filipino. It doesn't matter if you're Asian or African American, Latinx, Caucasian. If you see something, say something. Don't just be an observer and expect something to go away. It takes all of us to stop hate. And I also believe that people hate others because they fear. And the fear is because they don't know. And people know only what they know. So having a forum like this is helpful for us to get to know who you are and get to know who our community is. Because you've heard me now say who is under that umbrella of Asian Pacific Islander, which is a huge umbrella. And thank you for allowing me to share. And again, I apologize for my lateness.
No, not at all, Joanne. Really appreciate your remarks, and I appreciate your thoughts about this conversation. It's good to have you here. I would invite you to keep yourself unmuted, and we're going to go through some questions in the chat, and you should feel free to respond as you see fit. And I'm also inviting Councilmember Campillo and Andrea Beth to keep their mics open as well. And I want to go back to a question that Patricia had asked, and she asked it about 15 minutes ago, but she asked the categorization of a crime as a hate crime. Would that be done at the federal level or the state or local level? Are there different levels in which a hate crime can be described or applied to a crime?
Well, there are federal hate crime statutes, and there's state level hate crime statutes. I'm not sure if there's a difference in the wording or not, but typically it might sound crazy to say this, but there's fewer federal crimes than there are state crimes, just because of the jurisdiction that has to come involved with federal courts and what the federal government can police versus the states. But there are at both levels, and there are amplified penalties at both levels, similar to what I showed you with the California statutes. More years are typically tacked onto a prison sentence or other probationary terms like community service. But a lot of that is left up to the judge's discretion, and because of the judge's discretion, and I'm definitely a person who says judges should have discretion. It's sometimes troubling, like I said in my case, where the hate crime element part of the conviction was actually dismissed after the community hours were done.
Danette asked a question. She asked, due to the laws, is it pretty hard to prove that an incident was a hate crime, and are people reluctant to come forward much of the time? And this kind of goes back to an earlier loop we were talking about, how that Joanne was mentioning that sometimes people may be reluctant to come forward. You were mentioning that too, Raul.
Yeah, no, Joanne hit it right on. The elements are just very difficult to charge as a prosecutor. And let me start with this. As a prosecutor, if you have the evidence in front of you, with a police report or a witness statement, you think to yourself, I have an ethical obligation to only charge a crime against a person if I believe I can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And so even though it's obvious that something was motivated by a racial bias, if that piece of evidence doesn't exist, like Joanne pointed out, without a phrase that comes out of your mouth that would support that enhancement to a hate crime, a prosecutor doing their ethical duty won't charge it. But that also flies in the face of, well, we want to charge these things and put it before a jury because we want to show people that we're standing up against it. But so there's a tough interplay between the rules of professional rules of conduct that the state bar has for us as attorneys, and how we try to communicate to our communities that we're taking it very seriously. Absolutely, as Joanne pointed out, that woman, of course, she feels like the case wasn't taken seriously, but the ethical boundaries of prosecutors can't let them just charge anybody unless the evidence is very clear. So I hate to say it, but like I pointed out, the case that I prosecuted personally with the Uber driver who was of Arab descent, unless if he didn't have that dash cam with the phrases coming out of the defendant's mouth as he was getting punched in the back of the head, we couldn't prosecute the hate crime element. Of course, we'd prosecute the battery, but not the hate crime element.
Can I do a quick follow-up? If there's social media available of that individual belonging to either hate groups or whatever, and they commit a crime, can you use that evidence as showing bias?
So when you prosecute a case, it has to be directly based on the situation in front of you, right? And so it gets really difficult to, one, bring that evidence in. Oftentimes the judge will say, like, there's a disconnect between that evidence and the relevance to the specific conduct that's being prosecuted. Because what you do is you prosecute conduct. So you might have a person who is a member of Defend East County on Facebook and is liking a bunch of posts that are the most racist, vile things you've ever heard. But a judge is likely to say that isn't connected to this conduct. And I see the question here, does that go to character? Character evidence is usually left out because it can have the prejudicial effect on a jury to sort of turn against the defendant. The defendant has those rights to have the fair trial, and that character evidence oftentimes is unallowable. So, and there's tricky intricacies and exceptions to that. And so we don't have time to get into all that, but I would just say that oftentimes that outside stuff isn't going to come in. And if it does, then you still have to prove to the jury that it's evidence of it being a substantial factor to the violent conduct, and that it was that bias is what caused the violence. So it's really an uphill battle. The law is structured in a way that makes it very, very difficult to prosecute people who commit hate crimes. Bottom line.
And I think that rule can explain that, because as a community member, we don't know all of that when it comes to a situation, or what we see repeatedly on Facebook or on social media or on the news. So when people think there's an obvious verdict to even the George Floyd incident, there was so many layers of legalities that came into play, which again, we know what we know. And what we know as a community, it seems obvious that was wrong, that we witnessed a murder, and you should just, why did it take so long to prosecute, right? But so that's the same, I believe, when it comes to API hate. I see all the questions of why are we targeted? I don't know why we are targeted. I don't know why it's our elderly or why it's women, or if it's an African-American male when it comes to the police that they respond differently. I don't know, but because there is reporting, now we can monitor if there is an uptick in the Asian or Filipino community or in the African-American community. But just like Raul's, he's describing all the legalities, but the regular citizen, we don't know all of that. And it's forums like this to better educate. And then we talk to our elected officials, the lawmakers, that if there are so many incidences like this, then maybe we need to have policy change so that you do include this has happened or XYZ, so that it is crystal clear, because it's clear currently how they would prosecute and find someone guilty according to the current law, but it may take an initiative from the community to say we need to have stronger laws when an incident like XYZ happens. But so thank you, Raul, for sharing that, because I don't know all the legalities. And I think, again, what seems obvious to us that someone should be guilty of a hate crime isn't, because the way the law is written.
And the last thing I'd say, I appreciate that your statements, Joanne. And the hardest thing as a prosecutor was to tell a victim, like, I don't have the evidence to prosecute this. And of course, they're very, very upset about that. And oftentimes, like, I'll just say from a hate crime point of view, words have lots of different meanings. And so talking to a jury that's a substantial factor, it's really hard to find 12 jurors who are going to agree that, oh yeah, that is a substantial factor. It's not easy to prove anything to 12 people. Like, believe, right? Like, we're members of the Democratic Party. We know that, right? But like, so if we had an issue of anti-Semitism, and Andrea Beth gave a really comprehensive rundown of all the different, contradicting phrases that are used against Jewish individuals, some too poor, too rich and too powerful, but too lazy and too all these negative, nasty things. I mean, if a person of Jewish descent is or Jewish ancestry, I should say, is attacked, and they say like, here, how about some money, right? Like, there's all these things that we know are racist and are anti-Semitic, but you got to prove it to 12 jurors, and they're going to say, oh, well, what is money? Money is nothing. It's like, well, if you know thousands of years of history of anti-Semitism, you know that that's anti-Semitic, and that should be proof of the substantial factor of a hate crime. It's not easy to prove to 12 jurors. And that goes through every prosecutor's mind is, can I prove it to 12 jurors? What is the thing I showed you today? The jury instruction. That's the first thing I start with and say, how am I going to prove this to the jury? So that's why it's so difficult.
I want to Raul about cultural competency and how that weighs into having a jury that's likely to give you a good outcome in one of these cases.
So are you mean are you mean about cultural competency of the jury, of the jurors?
Of the jury, yeah.
So to a certain extent, I mean, it's hard to get to the bottom of that in the amount of time a judge will give you in voir dire, the jury selection process beforehand. And you can't give away all the trial in that. You have to you have to keep it at a certain high level. But what you can do is sort of educate the jurors a little bit about stuff. I mean, let me, it's hard for me to think back to my trial days that were quite a while ago at this point. A lot of campaigning since then. But you as the prosecutor and the defense attorney, even, because oftentimes defendants have rights as well, right? And defendants are often taken advantage of by unethical prosecutors. Each attorney gets to educate the jury a little bit as to sort of the way to think about the case. And so you might go through and ask a question, be like, juror number one, have you ever, and let's say this is a hate crime case against an Asian, where the victim is an Asian individual. You'd say, how much time, have you spent in communities that have many Asian individuals? Okay, and you can try to they say, oh, not much. And you might say, well, why not? And they will say, oh, well, I didn't grow up around a lot of Asian individuals in my neighborhood. It'd be like, oh, okay. So would you say that it's fair to say that you don't know a lot of the challenges they face or the contributions they've made? And you try to you pull those questions out to try to teach all the other jurors that are listening. Oh, now they're starting to let their brain run through. And that's one. And then you say, does anybody have a thought about that? That's the key question for voir dire. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? And someone raises their hand, and then they say something that you didn't ask for, but it can educate the other jurors, and you get cultural competency that way. But unfortunately, you don't have a lot of time to do that, and you don't get to know every juror's ins and outs and experiences in that way. And that just shows that our education system really has to spend a lot more time on multicultural education, and ethnic history is a requirement in our California education system. Those sorts of things make it much more of a safe community, not just because the individuals know it, but because they then can stand up as a member of a jury in a hate crimes trial. So great question.
But it's interesting because it brings to mind a different meaning of the phrase jury of your peers.
Right. Undoubtedly. And think about the fact that Joanne pointed out, the individuals who don't speak English and don't have the prosecutors don't have cultural competency to really help them with the victim services. Imagine what that person feels like as a victim who might want to come and testify in trial. I've had cases where a person speaking Spanish and comes and testifies, and it is very intimidating to walk into a courthouse, first of all, especially when courts have often been used against people of color and against immigrant communities. So for them to walk in, to even trust the prosecutor in the first place is really hard. So the system is really geared to make it as hard as possible to protect victims of hate crimes, victims of any crime, if they come from a BIPOC background, and that extends to LGBTQ victims as well. Like, unfortunately, they've been, not getting the benefits of a just legal system. So it's very hard to expect them to testify in their own favor in those sorts of circumstances. I think you're muted, David.
All right, Tommy stepped away, so I'm going to go to the next question that's on here. We did Danette, due to laws, it's pretty hard to prove an incident was a hate crime. Are people reluctant to come forward much of the time?
I think we nailed that one.
So, yeah, I think we've probably covered that one, but does anybody want to add any thoughts or ideas on that?
Well, I know, I think all of us know how difficult it has been for women who have been victims of rape and abuse to come forward against their abuser, and how women are often blamed for their own abuse. And I imagine that the same kind of issues come up with other, in other instances as well, with other communities.
Just to tie into that, the district attorney and their office having not processed how many rape kits, that shows us, how much they care about women and their claims of having been sexually assaulted. So I agree with that. It's when you want to say that you're standing up for any group of people, it's not your words, it's your actions. And if you're standing up for women, and we know the district attorney was Bonnie Dumanis when this whole lag occurred, and now we have Summer Steffen again, and she's not doing anything to catch up on it. It just shows that their priorities are skewed, and they're not taking care of a segment of our population that has been victimized. So there's that. And then Danette also commented on Brock Turner. The judge didn't want to ruin his promising career. And again, that's we hear this all the time. People show promise, but I tell you what, if you make a bad mistake, you need to be held accountable. But if you can't hold yourself accountable, then and do the right thing, then society needs to hold you accountable, and you need to pay suffer the consequences for your behavior and your indiscretion. Any thoughts on that, anybody?
I want to bring that up to the county has a Women and Girls Commission, and a friend of mine is the chair there. So Leah Goodwin. So I don't know if they realize the backlog is still a current issue. And now that we have a new administration, I think we should bring it forward and see if they can create the change that we're seeking.
Good idea.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Tommy. Tommy took that pause that refreshes, so I'm going to mute myself and give the meeting back to Tommy.
But
I want to go ahead, Joanne.
I think Danette had her. I don't know if I say your name right.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. No, just a really quick comment that I think there's a lot of overlap with the women's issues, and like we were talking about, a lot of victims get blamed for what happened to them, which I know is not fair. And I would imagine it would be the same difficult task to prove. So I think that's why a lot of women don't come forward too, because they know that they're going to get, just raked over the coals when they're up on the stand. I think that's probably goes for people that are, victims of these hate crimes too, especially in light of, we're just coming out of the last administration where he vilified everyone. So I'm sure that's part of it too. People are fearful. They're fearful of the cops. They're fearful of this thing that's been unleashed in our country that's always been there under the surface, but now they're seeing it full force, and I'm sure that has an effect on people too.
Yeah, I think the religious bias also against the LGBTQ community makes those members of that community as nervous about pressing charges as women who are victims of abuse do. They're treated pretty much the same way.
I would just throw in one little thing, because I've been talking from the prosecutor role of beyond reasonable doubt and juries and all that other stuff. A civil lawsuit in terms of a restraining order, the evidentiary standard isn't nearly as high. You can get it done ex parte if you collect that evidence and take it to a court, hire a lawyer to take it to the court, and have an ex parte restraining order issued against the person who is threatening you or has done something to cause you to feel fearful for your safety. And that is like the first way to go through. And then you have to have a hearing within a few weeks in front of a judge, allow that person to defend themselves. But that is a lower standard of evidence to actually find protection. And it's preventative as well. To a certain extent, it's preventative of further harm or victimization. Obviously, there has to be a certain amount to be able to get the restraining order in the first place. But I've advised many friends of mine who've come to me and said, "Hey, do you think this person committed a crime?" And I was like, "I don't know, but you got those emails and those text messages and the voicemails and a witness statement. Get a restraining order and cut it off now so that you don't end up the victim of a battery or worse." And so the civil, that's also traumatizing because you got to go through all the stuff you've lived through to get to that point as well. But I would rather have a person do that than have to call the police after they've been very physically injured.
I think that's really useful advice for folks who are experiencing ongoing harassment or intimidation or abuse. But so much of what we're talking about is random. Random, out of the blue, nobody you ever saw before. It's totally unexpected. And to me, that's the most frightening thing about these kinds of hate crimes, is the sheer randomness of them. May not be somebody you've ever seen before.
Yeah, that's something that's come up with some of my neighbors, and Leonard was asking about that earlier. And I think that's what's been the most troubling thing about this wave of violence and just intimidation with our Asian neighbors and AAPI neighbors is that randomness to it. You're just at the grocery store and you're just in your own thoughts and you're not thinking of anything else, and you go around a corner and potential interaction can happen. I have an elderly neighbor that's come by just to let us know that, before the time change, it was getting dark earlier, and just to let us know that she was out in front with the dog because she knows my wife and I. But that's troubling stuff that I only need to hear one time, and that's just a difficult place this country is in right now. And we started off the discussion about is there any sort of enforcement or policing for intimidation? I think it might bear another round of discussion on that, if anyone had any other thoughts about how you approach that.
I know the LGBTQ community in Hillcrest, and I think North Park also, has organized a citizens patrol for Friday and Saturday nights, so that members of the community can call in when they might not be ready to call the police.
Yeah.
Or to have members of the community present when they call the police. So they can have members of the community who will be with them while they're waiting for police to arrive, or members of the community who will have their back in the event that the police who arrive are not particularly sensitive to them as members of the LGBTQ community. So, so I know that that's something that the LGBTQ community has organized. I don't know, the Jewish community has not organized something like that. And I haven't heard of anything like that coming out of any of our other segments of the community.
In the Asian community, I don't know how to scroll up with all the chat. I'll admit I'm not a techie, so I can't see all the questions that I saw earlier for me. I know there was a question if there was any volunteers to help the Asian elderly. What I've heard during an interview I had yesterday with the ABC National, there are 2 Asian college students that have fundraised to provide rideshare vouchers or reimbursement. There is a $30 cap, but they will provide paid rides for our elderly. And we're actually trying to see if we can tap into that on Saturday. We have a Moderna vaccine pop-up in National City at a church. Many Filipinos are of Catholic belief. So we've partnered with Father Nemi there. So we're offering, I'll confirm tomorrow if we can offer it to parishioners that need a ride. And that's the extent. There has been talks by a few of our groups to provide that, but I proceed with caution because not everybody has that same positive intent. And I think we have to vet, the volunteers. We have to make sure that, they're registered somehow and there isn't an organization that is picking that up, to do that coordination. I know it could be really informal, but with nowadays, you don't know who amongst, the group if you don't vet folks out. And I'd rather have an organization do so, plus have a meeting with the elderly that they're wanting to help. If it's nearby a senior housing, like where that Lola lives, I believe she's living in a senior affordable housing, a place in downtown. So they would need to meet with them. They need to become familiar, but we also need to make sure the volunteers are going to show up because more often than not, we react to an incident in the community and everybody's rah, rah, rah for, 2 weeks. And then another incident happened. And then now we shift and we pivot to another incident. Unfortunately, that it happens, but I think everyone has that good intent. So we are trying to find ways. But again, I really think it's forums like this where we get to know our neighbor, get to know our nuances, get to know, just your neighbor, so that we do look out for one another, like the neighborhood watch that we used to have. And maybe that's what we need to bring back, where we're watching out for our neighbors. It's not just for the Asian community or the Latinx or LGBTQ or any one community. We're all one community. We're all San Diegans that want to live in a safe neighborhood and be able to walk the street, go shop, go have a cup of coffee. And so it takes all of us. Yes, we have to pay attention if we see an uptick in a certain community, but it's going to take all of San Diego to erase this hate and move forward. Because I don't want to keep retelling the story of all the negatives. Let's create a new narrative, and this is the beginning of it, I believe.
I know in La Mesa, the police department will help residents put together a community neighborhood watch thing. And I live in an apartment complex with a very, very diverse community. And I've started talking to my neighbors, asking them, would you be interested in this sort of thing? And so far, all the responses have been really positive. Any one of us here could be a hate target. We live across the street from a 7-Eleven where a lot of unstable people hang out. And sometimes they wander around our complex. So it's good to know who lives here, who doesn't, who's coming in, who's going out, and look after each other.
Sorry, I know we said last comment there. I have to jump off right at this moment. I got someone who's relying on me at this moment. But hey, Joanne, Andrea, it's great to share the microphone with you and everybody else as well. Thanks for being here.
Good
And
to
if
see
you
you
need
all.
anything,
Can we take a group pic real quick? Everybody smile.
Sure.
I can post it. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronald. That was awesome.
got
Thank
it.
you, council member.
You're a dynamo. Teach me how to get into council. I've been trying for 2 years.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Carl.
David, how are we doing on time? And do we want to go about 9 o'clock?
We need to go to Mike, and then I'm going to do the wrap up.
Okay. Mike, the floor is yours, buddy.
Okay, this is a little bit off topic, but it's something I think we should be aware of because it's only a little off topic. You may recall that during this wonderful forum, the subject of women being afraid to report rape attempts or rapes is a major issue, and it is closely related to hate crimes and things. What I wanted to let you know, if you don't know already, that a week from yesterday is Denim Day, which sounds like it's a sale on blue jeans at Kohl's, but it really isn't. What Denim Day is actually a very serious, it's not a holiday, but time to wear jeans as something of a protest. And what it's based on is in 1998, which as of next Wednesday, a 19-year-old woman in Italy was taking a driver's education course, learning how to drive, and her 45-year-old driving instructor had her drive into the woods in Italy, at which point he pulled her out of the car and raped her. She went home. He made her drive home. She went into her parents, told them about it, and her parents, to their credit, filed charges, and it went to court. The rapist was found guilty. However, what happened later was the case was appealed and was ruled that because she was wearing very tight jeans, she must have helped him remove them, and therefore it was consensual and he got off. So every year on the 28th is Denim Day, and everyone is encouraged to wear jeans. And I can tell you, to put just a light thing on this very serious topic, that after a year of not wearing pants and being stuck in the house, at least long pants, you may find that when you try putting on jeans next Wednesday, that they're also very tight. But in honor of that young lady who's no longer so young, she's got to be in her 40s by now, I recommend that we all wear jeans and tell our friends to do the same thing.
I want to thank all my speakers that showed up. I'd like to thank Tommy Howe, our moderator. Awesome job, Tommy. Andrea, Beth, Raul, who's no longer here with us, and then Joanne. It's like you are the souls of your community, and we need to know so that we can support you better and take care of our friends and our neighbors. And I saw a sign on my way home today that somebody put in their front yard, said, "Quit watching the news and just love your neighbor." And I just said, that really is what we really need to start doing, because we're just glued to the media, and we're not taking care of each other.
Yeah, it's just retelling that same story, and it's like we need to move forward. We recognize what's going on, but we need to move forward, and it's not retelling that old story. We need to create the new narrative. So it is getting to know your neighbor, loving your neighbor, and enjoy San Diego. We have great weather. We should be out, having coffee, walking at the beach, and just enjoy. Life is too short. Life is too short.
Absolutely.